I can't forgive myself for how long I defended Nick Blaine. I sat through 6 seasons of this man making increasingly questionable choices, and I kept making excuses. He's trapped in the system, I'd say. He's protecting June, I'd argue. He's doing what he can from the inside. And then season 6 happened, and I had to confront the uncomfortable truth that maybe, just maybe, I'd been romanticizing a war criminal because he had pretty eyes and said sweet things to the protagonist. And it made me think of Solzhenitsyn's chilling observation. The line between good and evil runs not through states, nor between classes, but right through every human heart. Nick Blaine is that line personified. A man who loves deeply, yet enables horror, who resists in whispers, but obeys in actions. And Nick Blaine breaks my heart, because he's the perfect embodiment of how totalitarian regimes don't just crush people, they seduce them. They take your vulnerabilities, your desperate need for safety and belonging, and they twist those human needs into compliance. They make you complicit by degrees until you can't tell where survival ends and collaboration begins. And I cannot stop thinking about how terrifyingly realistic that psychological journey actually is. Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, sometimes I make deep dive character breakdowns that will probably ruin your ability to watch anything casually ever again. And today we're dissecting one of the most divisive characters in recent television history. So if you're ready to have some uncomfortable conversations about morality, survival, and the price of love under fascism, smash that subscribe button and let's dive in. When we first meet Nick Blaine, he's practically a piece of furniture. Seriously, he's this quiet, enigmatic presence in the Waterford household. Their driver, their guardian, always watching, rarely speaking. And that's exactly what makes him so dangerous, both to the characters around him and to us as viewers. Think about this. In a world where surveillance is survival, where every word could be your last, who do you notice? The loud ones? The obvious threats? You don't notice the quiet man in the corner taking mental notes. You don't notice the driver who's listening to every conversation, cataloging every weakness, every moment of vulnerability. But here's what clicked for me about Nick's early portrayal. The show is deliberately playing with our expectations. We're conditioned by media to root for the mysterious, brooding guy. We see Max Minghell's stupidly attractive face, those soulful brown eyes, that carefully controlled intensity, and our brains immediately go, ah, yes, this is the secret good guy. This is the one who's going to save our heroine. The visual storytelling is doing so much work here that we don't even realize it. Notice how Nick is almost always positioned in doorways or on the periphery of scenes. He's literally and figuratively on the threshold between safety and danger, between compliance and resistance, between being a protector and being a predator. The costume design keeps him in muted blues and grays, colors that fade into the background, but also suggest depth, like still water that might be shallow or might be hiding something much darker underneath. And that something darker becomes the central question of his entire arc. Is Nick Blaine a good man trapped in an evil system? Or is he a man who chose complicity because it was easier than resistance? The recruitment, how desperation creates collaborators. Let me paint a picture of how Nick Blaine becomes Nick Blaine. He's a young guy from Michigan, economically desperate, emotionally volatile, probably dealing with some serious abandonment issues based on what we see of his psychology. Then comes along this group, the Sons of Jacob, and they don't recruit him with ideology. They recruit him with community, with purpose, with the promise that he matters. There's this concept in psychology called social identity theory that explains how people derive their sense of self from group membership. When you're isolated, struggling, feeling like society has failed you, Any group that offers belonging becomes incredibly seductive. And the sons of Jacob were masters at this. They didn't just sell people on an ideology, they sold them on identity, on being part of something bigger than their individual pain. Nick joins because he's desperate. He joins because he needs to eat. He joins because someone finally told him he had value. And that's how it starts, not with grand gestures of evil, but with small compromises that seem reasonable at the time. But here's where it gets really uncomfortable. Nick isn't some innocent bystander who accidentally ended up in Gilead. According to the show's own backstory, he was there from the beginning. He witnessed the rise of this regime. He saw the concentration camps being built. He watched the systematic stripping away of women's rights. And at each step, he made a choice to stay. Now, the show gives us those deleted scenes and script notes showing Nick looking visibly horrified and sick during Gilead's early days. The writers wanted us to see his discomfort, his reluctance. But you know what? Being horrified isn't enough. Feeling sick about it isn't enough. At some point, you have to decide, am I going to be a bystander to genocide, or am I going to find a way to fight back? And for most of the series, Nick chooses to be a very comfortable bystander. And here's where Nick's story gets really fascinating from a psychological perspective. He becomes an eye, literally a member of Gilead's secret police. But the narrative frames this as a form of resistance. He joins, we're told, to use the system against itself, to keep tabs on predatory commanders, to be a force for good from within. And I bought that. God help me, I bought that completely. But let's examine what being an eye actually means. You're a member of a secret police force. Your job is surveillance, intimidation, and the enforcement of authoritarian rule. You report on your fellow citizens. You help maintain a system built on terror. And yes, maybe you can use that position to help a few people here and there, but you're still fundamentally part of the machine that's crushing everyone else. There's this line from Hannah Arendt that haunts me. The sad truth is that most evil is done by people who never make up their minds to be good or evil. Nick embodies this perfectly. He never makes a conscious choice to be evil, but he also never fully commits to being good. He exists in this moral gray area where he can tell himself he's doing what he can while actually doing the minimum required to maintain his conscience. And that's the insidious thing about how authoritarian systems work. They don't require you to be a monster. They just require you to be passive, to tell yourself that you're powerless, to focus on the small kindnesses you can do while ignoring the massive harm you enable. Nick smuggles letters out of Gilead. He helps June escape. He provides intelligence to the resistance. These are all good things, but they're also drops in an ocean compared to his participation in maintaining the system itself. For every letter he smuggles, how many women does he help round up? For every small act of rebellion, how many orders does he follow that reinforce Gilead's power? Now, we need to talk about the elephant in the room, Nick's relationship with June. Because this is where the show, and honestly where I, got completely lost in the romance of it all. Nick and June's love story is genuinely moving. In a world designed to strip people of their humanity, they find each other. They create life. They share moments of tenderness and passion that feel like acts of rebellion against a system that wants to reduce them to their biological functions. But here's what I realized during my rewatch. Nick's love for June isn't actually evidence of his moral goodness. It's evidence of his selectivity. He's capable of deep love, fierce loyalty, and genuine sacrifice, but only for specific people. Only for June. Only for their daughter, Nicole. His circle of moral concern is incredibly small. Think about this. Nick will move heaven and earth to protect June, but he participates in the bombing of Chicago. He'll risk his life to get information about Hannah, but he'll follow orders that lead to the deaths of countless other people's children. He loves June with everything he has, but that love doesn't extend to caring about the broader suffering his actions enable. And that's not romantic. That's actually kind of terrifying, because it shows us a man who can compartmentalize his empathy so completely that he can be tender with his lover while being complicit in genocide. Love is the excuse we use for the things we do to people, Donna Tartt wrote. And in Nick's case, love is also the excuse for what he refuses to do, for whom he refuses to risk everything. The show frames this as romantic devotion, but what it actually shows us is moral selectivity. Nick decides who deserves his protection and who doesn't. And overwhelmingly, the people who don't are people he doesn't know personally. People who can't offer him love or sex or emotional connection in return.
Season 3 marks a crucial turning point for Nick, his promotion to commander. And this is where we really need to pay attention to the psychology of power and how it corrupts. The show presents this promotion as almost accidental, a consequence of his defiance, not a reward for loyalty. But let's think about what Gilead's leadership actually sees when they look at Nick. They see a man who's been loyal for years, a man who follows orders, a man who can be trusted with surveillance and enforcement. They're not promoting someone they consider a threat, they're promoting someone they consider one of them. When Nick puts on that commander uniform, something fundamental shifts. He's not just someone working within the system anymore, he is the system. He has power, authority, a voice in Gilead's governance. In a way, his arc echoes that infamous line from The Dark Knight. You either die a hero, or you live long enough to see yourself become the villain. Nick didn't die. He adapted. He rose in the ranks. And in doing so, he became exactly what Gilead needed him to be. Not a hero in hiding, but a man who forgot he was ever anything else. And what does he do with that power? He continues to prioritize his personal relationships over systemic change. He uses his position to help June and gather intelligence about Hannah, but he doesn't use it to meaningfully disrupt Gilead's operations. He doesn't sabotage military campaigns, he doesn't provide intelligence to the international community, and he doesn't use his access to other commanders to feed information to Mayday. Instead, he settles into his role. He leads troops. He participates in military operations. He attends meetings where Gilead's future is planned, and he nods along. Because it's easier. Because it's safer. Because challenging the system meaningfully would require him to give up the power and security he's accumulated. And this is where the show's moral complexity becomes genuinely disturbing. Because Nick's gradual acceptance of his commander role mirrors how people become complicit in real atrocities, not through sudden moral collapse, but through a series of small accommodations, each one justified as necessary for survival or the greater good. Season 6 forces us to confront everything we've been avoiding about Nick Blaine. And honestly, I'm grateful for it, even though it hurt to watch. The attack on the New Bethlehem training camp, Nick's betrayal of the Resistance mission, his choice to side with his Commander Bro Club over the people actually fighting Gilead, his wife Rose asking him to end June, and his apparent willingness to consider it. These aren't aberrations in Nick's character. They're the logical conclusion of his arc. This is what happens when you spend 6 seasons compromising your values for safety and comfort. Eventually, you don't have values anymore. You just have loyalties to the people who can protect you and the system that rewards you. And here's what really gets me about Nick's final season. The show stops letting him hide behind love as justification. when June explicitly tells him he has a choice, when she offers him a chance to truly rebel, to finally pick a side, he chooses Gilead, not because he believes in it, but because leaving would be too risky, too uncomfortable, too uncertain. And that moment when characters start calling him a Nazi, that's not hyperbole. That's recognition. Nick has become exactly what Hannah Arendt wrote about. Someone who enables evil through passivity, who maintains systems of oppression through inaction, who prioritizes his own comfort over other people's lives. That's when I realized something that made me feel sick. I'd been falling for the same seductive lie Nick tells himself, that small acts of kindness can absolve you of larger complicity, that loving one person deeply can excuse your indifference to everyone else's suffering, that being trapped in a system means you can't be held responsible for what that system does.
Let's talk about something that's been bugging me throughout this entire analysis. The myth of quiet resistance. The idea that Nick is secretly fighting Gilead from within. That his small acts of rebellion matter more than his large acts of compliance. This mythology is seductive because it lets us believe that you can resist authoritarianism without really sacrificing anything. That you can keep your comfortable position while still being one of the good guys. That working within the system is a valid form of resistance. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Quiet resistance that never escalates to actual resistance isn't resistance at all. It's performance. It's a way of maintaining your self-image as a good person while continuing to benefit from an evil system. And we know how that story ends. The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. Nick did many things to help June, but when it came to confronting the broader horror, he did nothing. And silence like that isn't neutral. It's endorsement wearing a mask. Real resistance requires sacrifice. It requires giving up safety, comfort, power, status. It requires making choices that put you at genuine risk. And Nick, despite all his supposed internal struggle, never makes those choices when they really matter. The letters he smuggles? Important, but he's not risking his position. Helping June escape? Heroic, but it serves his personal interests. Providing intelligence? Useful, but it doesn't threaten his standing in Gilead. When the moment comes for Nick to choose between his safety and meaningful resistance, when he could use his position as commander to really damage Gilead's operations, he chooses safety every single time. And that's what makes his character so valuable as a study in moral failure. He shows us how good intentions and small kindnesses can coexist with massive complicity, how love can be used to justify inaction, how the desire for safety can gradually erode every principle you thought you had. There's this concept in trauma psychology called moral injury. The damage that occurs when you're forced to act against your values in order to survive. And I think Nick's character is a fascinating exploration of how moral injury can become moral corruption. Nick starts as someone who joins the sons of Jacob out of desperation, witnesses the rise of Gilead with horror, and tries to maintain some sense of decency within an indecent system. That's classic moral injury. Being trapped in circumstances that force you to compromise your values. But somewhere along the way, Nick stops being injured by these compromises and starts being comfortable with them. He stops fighting to maintain his values and starts adjusting his values to match his actions. He tells himself that survival is the highest good, that protecting the people he loves justifies everything else. And that's how the trap works. Authoritarian systems don't break you all at once, they seduce you gradually. They make each compromise seem reasonable, each accommodation seem temporary, each betrayal seem necessary. Until one day, you wake up and realize you've become everything you once opposed. Nick's tragedy isn't that he was forced to make impossible choices, it's that he stopped seeing them as impossible and started seeing them as inevitable. He internalized the system's logic so completely that he couldn't imagine any other way of being. And the most disturbing part? The show suggests this isn't unique to Nick. Commander Lawrence goes through a similar process. So does Serena Joy in her own way. Even June makes increasingly morally compromising choices as the series progresses. This is how totalitarian systems work. They don't just control people through force, they control them through normalization. They make their logic seem like the only logic. Their values seem like the only values. Their version of reality seem like the only reality. So where does this leave us with Nick Blaine? Is he redeemable? Does his love for June count for anything? Do his moments of kindness matter in the face of his larger complicity? Here's what I think. Nick's character is valuable precisely because he resists easy categorization. He's not a cartoonish villain who chose evil because he enjoys causing pain, but he's also not a tragic hero who was forced into impossible circumstances beyond his control. He's something more uncomfortable. He's a normal person who made a series of understandable choices that led him to become complicit in monstrous things. He's someone who started with good intentions and gradually lost sight of them. He's a reminder that evil doesn't usually announce itself with dramatic flourishes. It creeps in through rationalization, accommodation, and the very human desire to survive. But the thing about redemption is that it requires acknowledgement. It requires taking responsibility. It requires changing course, even when that change comes at enormous personal cost. And Nick never does that. Even in his final moments, he's still trying to protect himself, still trying to maintain his position, still telling himself that he's just doing what he has to do to survive. Does that make him irredeemable? I don't know. But it makes him someone who chose comfort over courage, safety over principle, and personal loyalty over universal justice. And those choices have consequences that extend far beyond his own life. Nick Blaine forces us to confront a question that's much bigger than any individual character. What would you do? Because as Elie Wiesel warned, we must always take sides. Neutrality helps the oppressor, never the victim. Nick's tragedy is that he thought he was neutral, but in Gilead there's no such thing. If you lived in a society that was gradually becoming more authoritarian, more oppressive, more violent, what would you do? When would you resist? What would it take for you to give up your safety, your comfort, your relationships, your future? And if you found yourself already embedded in that system, if you had a job, a family, responsibilities that depended on your compliance, what then? How much would you risk? How much would you sacrifice? Nick's story is terrifying because it shows us how easy normal people can become complicit in abnormal evil, how gradual accommodation can lead to complete corruption, how the desire to protect the people we love can blind us to our responsibility to everyone else. But it's also important because it shows us the price of that complicity. Nick doesn't get a happy ending. He doesn't get to ride off into the sunset with June and Nicole. His choices catch up with him. His moral compromises ultimately destroy the very relationships he was trying to protect. And maybe that's the lesson, that you can't protect what you love by betraying what you believe. That safety purchased through complicity isn't really safety at all. That the systems we enable will eventually turn on us too. The legacy of Nick Blaine. As The Handmaid's Tale comes to an end, Nick Blaine leaves behind a complicated legacy. For some viewers, he'll always be the man who loved June Osborne with everything he had, who did what he could within impossible circumstances, who deserved better than the ending he got. For others, he'll be a cautionary tale about the banality of evil, the seductive power of gradual compromise, the way normal people become complicit in extraordinary horror. And honestly, both readings are valid, because that's what makes Nick such a complex and ultimately valuable character. He contains multitudes. He's capable of genuine love and genuine cruelty, real kindness and real complicity, moments of courage and years of cowardice. He shows us that people aren't simply good or evil, they're complicated. They make choices based on fear, love, ambition, desperation, hope, and 1,000 other factors that can lead them down paths they never intended to walk. But he also shows us that intentions don't absolve us of responsibility, that complexity doesn't excuse harm, that understanding why someone makes certain choices doesn't mean we have to approve of those choices. Nick is a mirror that reflects back some uncomfortable truths about human nature, about the conditions that create collaboration and resistance, about the price of survival in an unjust world. And maybe that's enough. Maybe that's the point. What haunts me most about Nick Blaine isn't just the choices he made, it's how easy they were to justify, to explain away, to romanticize. For 6 seasons, I did it, he did it, and maybe you did it too, because that's how it happens, not with jackboots and flashing lights, but with soft eyes and whispered vows, with just following orders and just trying to survive. Evil doesn't always show up wrapped in hate. Sometimes it wears the face of a man who kisses you softly and says he's doing his best. The world is changed by your example, not by your opinion. And Nick's example? It's what complicity looks like when it smiles. It's how good men help build bad worlds one small surrender at a time. So the question isn't whether Nick Blaine was a villain. The question is, if someone like Nick Blaine was standing beside you, not with a weapon, but with love in his eyes, would you recognize the system he upheld? Or would you look away, like I did, until it was too late? Because the truth is, fascism wears many faces, and the one that looks like someone you love might be the one that turns you into someone you don't. So what do you think? Was Nick Blaine a tragic hero or a willing collaborator? Is his love for June enough to redeem his other choices? What would you have done in his position? Let me know in the comments below, and please, let's keep this conversation respectful. I know Nick is a divisive character, but that's exactly why he's worth discussing. Characters who make us uncomfortable often have the most to teach us about ourselves. If you enjoyed this deep dive into moral complexity and the psychology of complicity, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more character analyses that will probably ruin your ability to enjoy anything without overthinking it. I've got videos planned on Commander Lawrence, Serena Joy, and the fascinating psychology of resistance versus collaboration throughout the series. Until next time, remember, the most dangerous monsters aren't the ones who know they're monsters. They're the ones who've convinced themselves they're heroes. Stay curious, stay critical, and I'll see you in the next video.